Good and perfect are the gifts from you. So I honor your blessing by blessing the way you do.
Yo, good evening, guys. Hey, my name's Tony, and I'm on staff here at Calvary. If you've been around, it's good to see you guys again. If you're new here, this is something we do every Sunday at 11 a.m., 5 p.m. We meet here to talk through what the Bible has to say about different issues in our life, because we believe that God is not just the God of heaven, but he's the God of heaven and earth, and we believe that he has something to say to each one of us every time we step inside this building, every time we study his word, every time we would posture our hearts in a way that says, God, speak to us. And so today we're going to be going through the third week in our series that we've been in with the entire church this fall, and it's called The Dangers of Blessings. Now, you might see some people around the room with some books. Those are books that we handed out the first week of the series, and we actually ran out. And so if you didn't get a book and you want one, I'm going to have you do this for me. Just raise your hand. We have leaders all around the room that would love to get you a booklet. These books, you're going to take those with you to small group. These, you can take notes during the sermon, all of that. And so if you do have a book and you don't have a pen to write with, therefore making your booklet useless, raise your book in the air and a leader will come around with a pen. So if you need a book, raise your hand. If you need a pen, raise your booklet and the leaders will come around and get that squared away for you. So, if just as we get started, as those books are being passed around, pens are being passed around, this third week of this series, we're jumping into another one of the blessings that God gives us. And those blessings are things that God has given us. We believe that he's given each one of us gifts, that he's been given each one of us stuff that's unique to us, that's unique to each one of you, that he's given us. And he says, hey, these are things I've given you for the betterment of this world that you can use to bless others, that you can use to further my kingdom. And this week, we're going to be talking about the blessing of wealth. The blessing of money, just when God gives us money or he gives us wealth, what we can do with that. And that there's some amazing things that we can do with money. There's some dangers involved with having money. And so we're just going to talk through those today. I know that this is a topic that you as high schoolers probably think that you're like, okay, who's this guy telling us about wealth? Like, I'm a high schooler. I have like $5 to my name and I use that for my weekly in and out after service. I get that. Like, I'm not pretending you guys are all wealthy. But the reality of the blessings of God, and the reason why we decided that we're going to talk through this as one of the 6 weeks of the series, is because even though you may not think you're wealthy, even though you think that $5 might not be very much, and like it's not, but it is that over 60% of the world lives on less than $2 a day. That's the reality for a lot of people across this world, and we don't see that because we're in Southern California, where like a lot of you guys, you might look at your friends who are living in the top of Sherwood or who are up in North Ranch, who are up somewhere, and you're like, I'm not that, and so therefore I'm not wealthy. But when we put it in perspective, we are so blessed, and God has given us so much wealth compared to the rest of this world that we need to be aware of that, and we need to know how to use that well. Because this sermon, I'm just going to start off with this. Any of you that are in this room and you're like, oh, great, he's going to tell me that like money's evil and like I shouldn't have any money, I shouldn't have any stuff. No, that's not what tonight is about. Tonight's about saying, okay, this is a blessing that God has given you. God has given you money. He's given you the ability to afford things that a lot of people can't. And so how do we use that blessing to further God's kingdom instead of for our own selfish gain? That's my hope, that when we leave this evening, we would see the dangers that are involved in the blessing, having the blessing of wealth, but also we could see what could happen if we were to take the way that God tells us to handle our money and handle our wealth seriously. And so when we look at the concept of wealth or the concept of having money, like, you have money that you can spend on all of these different things, and what that is it's a blessing from God, which basically means it's a gift. Like, God has given us all the ability to have money. Maybe you're sitting here and you're like, no, I worked for my money. Like, I do 3 shifts a week at Chick-fil-A. Like, when I get that paycheck in, it's like $65, and that's $65 that I've earned. That's my money, and you can't take that from me. No. Like, it is. You did work for that, but it's not your money. That's a gift from God, that he has given you the opportunity to have that job. He's given you the opportunity to earn that money, and then you went out and did something with the opportunity, and then God gave you that paycheck. He gave you the money. And the thing about a gift is that if you don't know how to use a gift properly, it's useless. A gift is useless unless you know how to use it. And that goes for everything from possessions to the gift or the blessing of salvation that we talked about last week, and the blessings that we're going to be talking about for the weeks to come. But this week, like the gift of wealth that God gives us and the gift of money, that's useless for God's kingdom unless we know how to use it. I told this story in the morning service that I have this one uncle. I know everybody has that uncle that like everybody loves, but they're kind of out there, and that's okay during family gatherings and stuff. You're like, okay, I'm gonna talk to this uncle, and it's gonna be fine because we'll have an awkward 2-minute conversation, then I'll move on. But then Christmas time comes, and you know that uncle's gonna get you a gift, and you start to really wonder about like, where is this man's sanity? Because this uncle, he'd give us these gifts every Christmas, and this was when I was like 6, 7, 8 years old, and when you're that age, you just want toys that you can play with. Like that's pretty much it. You're like, you want to open it up and you want to be able to play with the toy right away. But his was always just like, it might as well have been from IKEA or something with directions in a foreign language. It was always like you'd open the box and there's all these parts that you had to put together. And like this toy, it would work well if you put all the parts together right, but I was never smart enough to do that. Like I'd read the directions and I'm like, this is like a foreign language to me, and I'm the kid that always throws the directions away anyways, because I think that I know better than whoever like made the toy. And so I'd always open these gifts and I'd throw the directions away and then have no idea how to use like what I'd been given, because I'd start putting pieces together and I'd be like, oh, this looks like it goes here, and it'd be like this car that I was supposed to build, and it would wind up looking like some mangled, like, I don't know, catapult that just didn't do anything. But you see, what happened is I was given a gift. I was given something that was supposed to be like super fun, and trust me, like when I did get it right, it was super fun, but when I didn't know how to use the gift, I wasn't able to do anything with it. And that's the thing that God has to say to us about our wealth and about our money is, that's something that he's given us, and we can do incredible things. God can do amazing things through our wealth, through the money that we have. But if we don't know how to use it, and we don't know how God has called us to use it, that renders it useless. Because I think that we have this false perception of what our wealth is for. We think that it's for us and for furthering our own well-being and our own comfort, and that it's all about me. But God is saying, no, it's so much bigger than that. And so when I was putting this message together, I started thinking about, okay, what are the big things that we spend our money on? And I think, I say we because there's you guys, but there's also me, and I'm still living like that broke college kid life. And so I think the stuff that like, when you go buy your $5 In-N-Out and I go buy my $5 In-N-Out, it's like same. So I was like, okay, great, let's just work through what we spend our money on. And so the first one is this, the first thing that you might spend money on is clothes and shoes. I think this is one of the biggest areas where I see people spend just an exorbitant amount of money. Like for you guys, yeah, I know that was a big word, points for me. And just so much money that we put into clothes and shoes that, where I came from in Colorado, nobody really cared what you dressed like. And so it was like, great, I got my $5 t-shirt and like my hand-me-down jeans, and that was enough. But out here, I'm like, that same $5 t-shirt, I walk into like Zara or I walk into Nordstrom or whatever, and I'm like, that's $50? What in the world? That, we spend so much money on clothes and shoes, and I'm not saying that's an evil thing, but I look at that and I'm like, wow, we prioritize that so much because we want to fit in. We think that if we don't have the coolest shoes, or we don't have the coolest clothes, or people don't notice us because of what we're wearing, like we're not going to fit in. I wonder if any of you have ever looked in the mirror like 50 times before coming to church because you're like, oh, I hope that cute boy or that cute girl is going to see me because of the way that I dress at church. And you start focusing so much on buying the right clothes and getting all the right stuff so that you can look the part, so that you might be accepted by the people around you. I know that's the same in schools, and I'm sorry that that's the reality we live in, but I know that's something that a lot of you struggle with, and that's something that I think that we need to look at and recognize how much money we spend on those things, and recognize that we're trying to spend that money on ourselves so that we might fit into the way that everybody else looks and the way everyone else dresses. The second thing that you may spend money on, I put it up here, I just said In-N-Out, which is probably about half the story because the other half's Chick-fil-A, but in all seriousness, it's going out to eat. We like to dress nice for church, we like to dress nice for school, and then we like to make it through the day. You get through your last class and you're like, I can't wait to go to Chick-fil-A with all my friends, and I'm gonna order like a 30-piece and a large fries, and I'm gonna splurge, I'm gonna treat myself this week and get the frosted lemonade. Like that's what I'm gonna do. And I'm gonna spend all this money on Chick-fil-A or In-N-Out, and you do it every once in a while, and then you find yourself doing it like 3 times a week, and you're like, I'm spending $60 a week on Chick-fil-A, what is this? And we spend so much money on these things because we think that that is going to bring us happiness. We see that everybody else is going out to eat, and so I should too, because I might not fit in if I don't spend that kind of money. We look at those two. The third one, oh, this is going to get you guys. I'm sorry, but not really. The third one's coffee. There we go. We got some coffee drinkers here. So it's fall. Fall is here. And what does fall mean at Starbucks? Pumpkin spice. Okay, yep. Oh, you got one right there. Yeah. No, we spend so much money on coffee. Think about that. Every pumpkin spice latte you buy is like $5 because Starbucks is trying to rip us all off. But we spend so much money on coffee. And I don't even know why. I do it too. I'm just like, what in the world? And it's always because you go and it's like $5 and you're like, oh, this is no big deal. But then you go 5 times that week and all of a sudden you're spending $25 on coffee. And we spend so much money on this that we don't even realize. And I'm not saying that this is evil. I think a lot of us don't even recognize that we do it. But when you start adding up these things, just these 3 things alone, we start to realize how much we spend money on ourselves and how much we spend just on our own comfort and on our own appearance. And ultimately what that's saying is that we value ourselves above everything else, because once we start spending money on ourselves, that says where our priorities are. This fourth one, I put up, I just call it the trends. I know you guys are just gonna laugh at me, but that's fine. It's basically anything that you buy, like think back 2 years ago, something that you bought and you're like, this is the coolest thing ever. And now you're looking at that thing, it's sitting in the bottom of your closet and you're like, why did I ever spend $50 on that? Like, what in the world? I'm thinking like fidget spinners from a few months ago and like even little stuff like that. We spend so much money on those things that seem like they're the coolest thing to have right now, and we're so willing to fork over money for that. But then a couple years from now, you're gonna look and you're gonna be like, why did I do that? Or you're on to the next thing. You see, I look at these 4 things up here, and what that says to me, and trust me, when I was writing these out, this isn't like, oh, what can I say that's really just gonna get the high schoolers? This was a list that I was like, wow, if I'm being honest, these are probably 4 of the top things that I spend my money on too. And what that says is that says something about me, and that says something about what I value. Because when we realize what we spend our money on, we put our money on the things that we value most. Like if you think about it, the money that you spend, you're gonna spend more on something that you value more and less on something that you value less. And so if I'm gonna look at my heart and I'm gonna look at what I'm spending my money on, and I see that those are the things that I spend my money on, that those 4 things make up spending money on me, and then I look at the amount of money that I give or that I use to bless other people, and I start to see that I spend so much over here but so little on other people. I start to have to look at my own heart and be like, is this really what God has for my money, for my finances, for what he wants me to do? And I look at that, and that's haunting to me, but it's encouraging because the Bible does have something to say about that, and that's the parable we're going to be looking at today, is that we're not the only ones that struggle with spending our money on ourselves and thinking that the blessing of wealth is for us. That there's in Luke chapter 12, there's a man who does the exact same thing, and Jesus is in this situation. What's going on is he's teaching to these people. You can open up your Bibles, your booklets to Luke chapter 12. It'll be there. You can also get there on your mobile device, your iPhone. Sorry, I don't know what that was. And you can open up to Luke chapter 12. And what was going on is, so Jesus is teaching to this crowd of people. It would be kind of like this, not in a building like this, but there was a crowd of people around Jesus, and all of a sudden somebody in the crowd, he would have been teaching, and someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." This would be like, he's teaching, and this would be like if somebody over here were to just go stand up all of a sudden and be like, "Tony, I'm in an argument with this person, and you need to tell them they're wrong." I'd be like, 1, no. 2, sit down, be quiet. I have the microphone. Or it'd be like if someone over here like stands up and they're like, "Hey, this person said something bad about me last week. Tell them they're the worst." And I'm like, no, stop. Don't tell me what to do. Like, no. This is what was going on here. Jesus was teaching, and this person gets up and basically tells Jesus, "This is my situation. This is what I want you to do about it." And now you need to go answer the way that I want you to answer. And he says, teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. So what this was is he specifically was requesting that Jesus would divide the inheritance that he and his brother were probably fighting over. Back in this day, the inheritance was when a father died, the inheritance was split up between the older brother and the other brothers, but the older brother would get a double portion of the inheritance. So he'd get twice as much as everybody else would. That's just how it worked. I don't know why. It was just custom. And so this was somebody who was basically saying, okay, this is my situation. I see that I'm not the older brother, but like I want my share. Like I deserve this. And Jesus looks at him and he's like, no, you don't understand. You're asking for me to do something. You're telling me to divide this wealth between you because you want comfort. You want this wealth for yourself. You want this money for yourself because you feel like it's something that's owed to you. When he's like, that's not my hope for you. My hope is not that you would put your trust in wealth. My hope is not that you would chase after the money that you think that you deserve. My purpose for you is so much greater. And he responds this way. It says, Jesus replied, man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you? Then he said to them, watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. And basically what he's doing is he's kind of slapping this guy across the face. He's like, no, you're asking the wrong question. You're telling me to do the wrong things. He's saying, watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. This is basically, the dude's like, hey, like make sure that this guy gives me the money he's owed. Jesus is like, watch out, dude, you're greedy. Watch your heart. Like that would be a straight up slap in the face if someone said that to me. Like I'm asking a question like, hey, Jesus, like this is my situation. This is what I want you to do. He's like, you're greedy. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm sorry. This is what is happening here. And he says this, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. And that was the first part of this passage that hit me super hard because I look at that word life. He says life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. And I think so much of what we do in life is we chase after possessions because we think that those will make us happy. We think that if we could get more stuff, if we could accumulate more things, if we could buy more, if we could afford more, then life would be comfortable and we would be happier. And we think that if we just chase those, someday we'll reach the pinnacle of wealth and then we'll be happy. But I look at that, and Jesus looked at that here, and he said, that's such a toxic thing. Beware. Watch out for that. Because the reality is the priorities of your finances reveal the posture of your heart. That wherever, there's a verse that we put up here when we talk about giving, and it says, watch out, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. It's this idea that whatever we spend our money on is what we value and ultimately what our heart starts chasing after. So if your heart is chasing after wealth, you're always going to be chasing wealth. And you're going to keep chasing and chasing, and you're never going to arrive, but your heart is going to be so captivated by that you're not going to be able to see anything else. You're going to be blinded. When your finances are your priorities, when chasing money is your priority, it reveals what's going on in your heart. And Jesus might say, hey, your actions might even look good. You might look like you're spending your money on the right things, or you might not think that you're doing anything wrong, but I care about your heart more than I care about your actions. And so that's what I'm going to address in this passage. And so Jesus goes on and he says this, it says he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. You see, this story to me, I think it's easy for us to read it and judge this guy and be like, wow, well, he had this abundant harvest. Basically what happened back then is the grain that he had gotten, he was in agriculture. And so the grain that you got basically was the equivalent of money today. That was what their economy was driven on. And so if you had a good harvest, if you had a good year, you were going to be very financially well off. And so he looks and he has this amazing year where he gets all this grain that was coming in, and he harvested. He's like, look, I got no place to put this. Like, I don't know what to do with all of this that God has blessed me with. He's given me so much. And then he says, this is what I'll do. I'm just going to keep building more barns. I'm going to tear down what I have. I'm going to build more and more and more so that I can store up this grain, so that basically I don't have to work anymore. I don't have to work or to trust God for anything more. I've got my grain, and if I just store this up, I'll be good to go for years. And I think for us, we look at that, and maybe obviously, I think for most of us, it's not grain. Like, we don't have fields out there. We're in like suburban Southern California. But we do this same thing. When we chase wealth or we chase stuff, we think that if we can just get the next thing or the next, if we can afford that next car or the phone or the clothes, or if we could just live the lifestyle that you see your friends living, then you'll be happy. And you start chasing this, and ultimately what you're doing is you're trying to build those same bigger and bigger barns like this guy was, because you're trying to get to a place in life where you're comfortable with where you're at so that you don't need to trust God anymore. That I think what was happening in this story is this guy looked at what he had and he said, I'm so afraid to lose this. I'm so afraid to not be in control of my situation. Like if I were to give away some of this grain to other people, I wouldn't have as much for me. Like what if life gets hard later on? What if like the winter comes or next year comes and I don't have enough to eat? I would rather try to store stuff away and control the situation I have right now than trust God later. Because what this guy had was he had an incredible opportunity to give away some of the grain. He had an opportunity to bless his community. He had an opportunity to do amazing things with the blessing that he had been given. But he chose to just hold on to it for himself. It says this, I'm going to read it one more time and just really think about what he's saying in this. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. Now, the two things that I see going on here is the first one is he never says anything about God. He never says, what would God have me do with this blessing that I've been given? He never says, God, what could I do with this that would honor you and would further your kingdom? He says, oh, this is what I'm going to do to make my life easy. This is what I'm going to do with what I have because this is my stuff. This is my money. This is my wealth, and I can do with it what I want. He's saying, I'm chasing after this idea of comfort because I think that that is where I'm going to find true life. That if I can just keep building these bigger and bigger barns, then I might be, like, people might look at me and say that I'm successful. They might look at me and say, wow, he's made it. And I think that a lot of us do that same thing. We just want everybody else in the room to look at us and be like, wow, he made it. Wow, she made it. And the reality of this parable is that there were probably people there who, if this actual situation was happening, that there'd be people that'd be looking at that guy and they'd be like, wow, he made it. Wow, that's amazing. Look at him. He's so wealthy. He did it right. He lived right. And now he's retired at 40 and he can just spend the rest of his life just golfing and days at the spa and whatever else he wants to do. Like, he doesn't have to work anymore. He made it. And my worry for all of us is that that's what we're chasing. I think that a lot of us in this room are chasing after wealth. We're chasing after money in the small ways in high school, but this is like a training ground for the rest of life, is that if your heart is just saying, hey, I want to make a lot of money so that I can have this retirement account and I can, retire when I'm 40 and then just spend the rest of my life doing whatever I want. I think that you might be in danger. And that's what Jesus is talking about here, is he's saying, if you are putting so much priority on wealth and on comfort to the point where you think that you can just get more and more and someday you'll be in a place where you don't need to trust God anymore, then you're in danger. And I think for us, I look at this parable and it haunts me a little bit, because I start to think about that and I'm like, what does this look like for us? Obviously, none of you in this room are anywhere near retirement. I'm sorry, students. Like, you got a long way to go. But in your lives right now, like, I was trying to think through. I was like, what are some ways that we can identify if we might be in danger? If you might be in danger. And I think the first one is this, is you may be in danger if your first instinct when you get money is to spend it on yourself. Because just like the man with the barns, he kept saying, this is what I will do. This is what I want to do with my money. This is for me. This is for my good. He was in danger because his first thought was, how can I make myself more comfortable? Not how can I bless other people? And my worry for some of you in this room is that when you get money, when you get that $60 paycheck from Chick-fil-A, you're like, wow, okay, what can I spend this on to make my life better? Because you see, the issue is not the paycheck. The issue is not the money. I think that some of you in this room are called by God to make as much money as you can so that you can give it away, so that you can have influence in this world, so that you can do amazing things for people. But the issue is not the money. The issue is that if you have that money and your first instinct is to say, how can I spend this on me? I think that that's the first one that we look at. And I thought this way, and I'd be lying if I said that I'd never think this way now, but I had my perspective rocked on how to spend my money in high school. My youth pastor, he is one of the most generous people that I've ever met. He has 3 kids, he's got a wife, he's in his mid-30s. Like, this was all when I was in high school, and he was one of the most generous people I have ever met. We'd go out to lunch if I was like, hey, I need to talk about something, or I need to, could you pray for me for something? We'd go out to lunch, and he never once let me pay. He was always like, I'd always, get my debit card out, and I'd feel really good about myself because I'm like, I have a debit card. I'm a real adult. Let me pay. He's like, no. I'm not going to let you pay. And one week I asked him, I was like, why not? Can't you let me bless you once? Let me do this. And he was like, no. You don't understand. You're going to do this for somebody else someday, so let me bless you now. And this was before I was going to go into ministry. This was before I was going to do any of this. I never thought that I'd be up on a stage talking to you guys. But he just saw the call of God on his life was to bless me because he had the resources to do that. And the most amazing act of generosity that he ever did was he watched me for 4 years in high school show up to game day at my school. Like whenever we'd have a game, we'd show up in suits. I don't know if you guys do this, but we did, where you'd have a game and everyone would show up in suits. And I didn't own a suit. I had my dad's hand-me-down suit. And if any of you, if you were to see a picture of my dad, he's kind of my height, maybe an inch taller, and just a big dude. And I'm not. I was even skinnier than this in high school. And so you can imagine how that suit fit. The legs were probably 4 times the width of these, and so they're just baggy, and I'm sagging unintentionally in my suit, and I've got this jacket that's falling off the shoulders, and I was just I didn't care. I was like, hey, this is what I've got. I had the tie that was about this wide for 60-year-old men. It was fine. I was like, cool, I'm looking great. This is suit day. But he was looking at me, and he's like, this kid has no idea what he's doing. But he looked at me, and my senior year, he was like, hey, we're going to go down to Denver, down to the big city, and I'm going to buy you a suit because you don't have one. And I kind of joked about it. I was like, yeah, I don't need a suit. I'm fine. Whatever. This is good. He's like, no. Let me do this for you. Let me get you a suit. And I'm sitting there. I'm like, one, no, because I know how much suits are. 2, why? And he just said that same thing. He's like, because I've been blessed by God. I have the ability to do this, so let me bless you this way so that you can then bless other people. Remember this when you go and when you make money someday, when you're, once you're in the position to do this for somebody else, you need to be willing to do that too. And that stuck with me. Now, every time, I still own that suit, and every time I wear that, I just think about the generous act that he had of giving that to me. And I'm just like, wow, how can I do that for other people? And that's the call of God on your life, and that's the call of God on mine, is when you get money, instead of your first instinct being, how can I spend this on myself? It should be, how can I bless other people with this? Because what that's doing is that's recognizing that your money isn't yours, that it's God's. That God has given you the gift of wealth, and you have the opportunity to make an impact on people's lives with that. And so that's the first point of where you may be in danger, is if your first instinct when you get money is to spend it on yourself. The second is this: you may be in danger if you've said, someday when I have just a little bit more, then I'd give it away. I think some of you in this room may be thinking you've gotten this far through the sermon, you're like, okay, great, I'm a broke high school, I've literally got nothing, but when I have a little bit more, then I'll give. And I wonder if any of you have played the game that I would play. It's a great icebreaker question with friends when you're 5 hours into a road trip and you've run out of literally everything else to say, and you turn to each other, you're like, so, if you won the lottery someday, what would you do with your money? And you get all the liars in the car where they're like, well, I would give $500,000 away, and then I'd start an orphanage, and then, I'd go and I'd quit my job, and I'd just try to save the world. And I'm like, no, you wouldn't. What are you trying to tell me? You get people all of a sudden when we think that if we think that we had more, if you guys in this room, if I were to say, hey, you have $1 million, what are you going to do with it? I think a lot of you in this room would have really good intentions, and you'd say, hey, I'd give $300,000 of it away. I'd give a bunch to my family. I'd give a bunch to friends. I'd go donate to charitable causes. Maybe I'd drop some in the offering box and tithe at a church. Maybe there's all these things that I do, but I look at that and I say, well, if you're not giving now, why would you give later? I think for a lot of us, we think that it's really easy to talk about if we had a little bit more, we'd give. But we don't want to look at our hearts and say, well, I might have just a little bit now, but of that little bit, am I willing to give now? Because it's a lot harder to give a lot of money later on than it is to give just a little bit now. And if you can start training your heart, if you can start saying, I'm going to give now, not because it doesn't hurt, not because I know that I'm giving away some of what I have, that then later on, you're going to be able to have that faithful heart that says, hey, it's not about the money. The money that I have is God's, and so God, would you do with it what you will? That's the kind of heart that's going to make a difference in this world. So the parable ends this way. It says, but God said to the man that was building the barns, he says, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God. He says, look, this is how it's going to be for anybody who thinks that they think that their wealth will make their life better. This is how it will be with anybody who prioritizes wealth over a relationship with God. This is how it will be with anybody who thinks that the epitome of success is found when you can store up things for yourself. This is how it will be with anybody who misuses this blessing. Because what he says here, he says, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? I love that line, where God's basically just like, you're going to die someday. Nobody's going to remember how much stuff you had, but somebody's going to get that stuff. I think that sometimes we think that we are the most important thing for God to bless other people. But this story, Jesus is just kind of slapping this guy in the face. And he's like, hey, yeah, you're going to die someday. And somebody's going to get your stuff. That's going to happen because God is in the business of blessing people. God's in the business of saving people. He's in the business of doing what he's going to do, whether you want to be a part of it or not. He's like, someone's going to get your stuff. But the beautiful thing about our God is that he doesn't want you to miss out on that blessing. He's looking at this guy. He's like, hey, if you're chasing money, if you're building bigger and bigger barns, if you're trying to reach this pinnacle of success, you're going to miss out on the blessing that I've got for you. Because when we put so much emphasis on wealth, when we put so much emphasis on trying to chase money for ourselves instead of trying to give money away and try to be generous with what we have, we're always going to be chasing and always going to be saying, I want more, I want more, I want more. What else can I get? But what God's saying here is he's like, this is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves but is not rich toward God. Because when you're chasing money, what you do when you chase money is money brings about comfort, and comfort lessens your trust in God. And so as you chase money more and more, you start walking farther and farther away from trusting God because you don't need to. When you try to build up your security so high that ultimately you can get to a point where you've got your house, you've got your retirement, you've got whatever it is, your college in order, you've got all of these things and you don't need to trust God anymore, that's when you've misused this blessing to the point where God's like, hey, come on, what are you doing? Get this guy, he's like, then who will get what you have prepared for yourself, that you've prepared this thing for yourself, but really that's like building on the sand, like we talked about a couple weeks ago. He's saying, with your wealth, you've got to be at a point where you say, God, whether you give me a little or whether you give me a lot, all of it's for your good and for your glory, and how can I use that to bless people instead of try to bless myself? I'm going to put this final question up. This is kind of something that I've been thinking through a lot when I think about how I spend my money, because it makes a contrast between a greedy person and a generous person. And this is the question. It says, greed always asks what else, but generosity asks who else. That if you're a person who's got a greedy heart, you're always trying to chase after wealth, you're trying to chase after things, you're always going to be asking what else? What else can I buy? What else can I get? What else can I do to make myself more famous, get myself more influence, myself more power? You're always going to be asking that. And you're never going to get an answer. You're always going to be asking what else. It's never going to be enough. But if you're a generous person, you're always going to be asking who else? Who else can I bless? Who else can I give money to? Who else can I use my money to make a difference in their life? Who else might I be able to lead to Jesus because of the influence that God has given me by giving me some wealth? Like, that's the beautiful thing. And the beautiful thing about that too is that you're always going to be asking that question. You're never going to arrive. Whether you're asking what else or who else, you're never going to get to a point where you're like, this has been enough. You're either always going to be asking, what else can I do to make my life more comfortable? Or you're always going to be asking, who else can I bless? So I'm going to invite the band back up. But I just want you guys to be thinking about that. I don't want this to be something that you just hear on a Sunday and then you leave unchanged, that this is the word of God, that God has something to say about our money. God has something to say about our stuff. That he says that these blessings that we've been given, even if you don't think that you have much, even if you don't think that you have much to give. God says you've got something and you've got enough. That you've got enough to make a difference in somebody's life. You've got enough to be there for somebody. You've got enough so that you can make a sacrifice with your wealth, with the blessing that God has given you so that you can bless others. The warning here is that you would spend it on yourself and that you would miss out on that blessing that God has for you. That you would start to trust God less and less as you start to get more and more wealth. But if you were to start today and say, hey, everything I have is God's, all my money is God's, all my stuff is God's. God, would you do what you will with my life? That's when real change is going to happen. Because I think that some of you in this room, that this is the thing that you like to hold on to. That you say, God, you can have every area of my life. You can have my heart. You can have, like, I'll trust you with my future. I'll trust you with my present. Like, I'll give you everything else, but don't touch my stuff. Don't touch my money. Because that's where my security is. I think some of you are so afraid to step out and say, you know, I'm going to give a little more than is comfortable. I'm going to start giving to other people, to the church, to you know, maybe it's just paying for a friend at In-N-Out who you know is going through a tough time and maybe can't afford it. And that might mean you go to In-N-Out one less time and you take them with you one more. And it balances out because math works that way. But for you guys, like, maybe that's what it takes. Is that you would just stop asking, what else can I do for myself? And you start asking, who else? Because this is the deal, and this is the final slide that I'm going to put up, and we're going to finish with this. I'm going to pray for us, and we're going to worship. But this is what God has to say about possessions. That possessions, your money, your stuff, everything that God has given you. That possessions are just a vehicle that God uses to get to people. And for our world, whether it's for better or worse or anything in between, like, that's how this works. That when you have money, you have influence. You have the ability to make a difference. And you can either use that money to buy things for yourself, or you can use that money to get to people, that God has given you that blessing so that you can get to people. God chooses to use us to reach those who would never come into this church building unless maybe one of you invite them. Maybe you invite them to coffee and you say, hey, I'll pay. And they've never had anybody care about them enough to, one, hear their story, ask them questions, but two, to just do something little like pay for their coffee. That those are the kind of acts of love and generosity that we can show to people that might bring them into God's kingdom, that might say, hey, wow, this person really values me, and I've never felt valued like that before. That's the God we serve. God values us more than any of us can ever comprehend. And if we're to live and love like Jesus, we need to use our wealth. We need to use what we have to do the same thing and to let people know that they are valued. That when we have wealth and we have influence, we can use it to further God's kingdom. And that can be a vehicle to get to people with the message of Jesus, with the love of Jesus. And so I'm going to pray for us. I just want each one of you to be thinking about maybe that one person that you could bless. Just a little thing. Lord Jesus, I thank you for everybody in this room. I thank you for all the influence that you've given us. God, I know it might not feel like we have a lot, but we have enough. We have enough to be generous. We have enough to give. We have enough to bless others, Lord. I pray that your blessings to us wouldn't stop with us, but that you would work through us in our communities, with our friends, at our schools. Would you do something in our hearts that starts making us ask the question of who else can I bless, and stop asking the question of what else can I do to make my life more comfortable? God, would you change our hearts? Would you fix our eyes on you? And as we enter this time of worship, Lord, would you continue to work in each one of our lives so that we could bless others in the way that you've blessed us? Amen.